But even this is meant to be a holy war, and the Prophet, through example, set out guidelines. Jihad was not a war of aggression, and attacks on property, places of worship, and civilians were condemned. But that was 1400 years ago. Today, jihad has become an effective weapon for terrorists to justify their actions, and leaders to mobilize the Muslim population. The story of this 20th century jihad begins in 1979 in Iran, where the struggle for a post-colonial Islamic identity overthrew the Shah of Iran and the most powerful regime in the Middle East.
We particularly welcome you and the Empress as good friends and old friends.
Although the West saw the Shah of Iran as an enlightened, westernized monarch, to his own people he had become an increasingly autocratic ruler. Grassroots discontent, dissent that was often voiced in the mosque, spilled over into the streets, and the world witnessed the first great Islamic revolution of our time. Jihad was the rallying call that the Ayatollah Khomeini used to mobilize the Muslims of Iran.
That revolution represented for some the ability of people, despite the overwhelming power of a regime seen as secular, as excessively dependent on the West, and as an oppressive regime and an autocratic regime, the ability of people to overthrow that regime, the ability of an unarmed people, in general, unarmed people, to overthrow a regime that was armed to the teeth and that used its arms.
The Ayatollah represented a return to religion in a country that was tired of looking to the West for support and an identity. Not only had the Shah of Iran been rejected, but the Western secular idea of separating religion and politics had also been overthrown. For the West, Iran became the embodiment of the new Islamic threat. And as the Ayatollah urged other Muslims to rise up and fight against corrupt governments in the Gulf and to rid the Arab world of Western influence, Western fear of other Islamic revolutions or jihads grew. Some Muslims in Iran responded to the Ayatollah's call by seizing the US embassy in Tehran.
With the fall of the Shah, the expulsion of the Americans from Iran, the seizure of the American embassy in Tehran in 1979, the taking of over 50 American diplomatic hostages there, who were held for almost 2 years, these were seen as catastrophic events in the West and were regarded as a wake-up call. Watch out, the Muslims are coming.
Just across the border from Iran, an Islamic revival was also taking place in Afghanistan. It threatened to topple the communist regime that had come to power the previous year. To quell the growing Muslim resistance, the Soviet Union invaded on Christmas Eve 1979. The Muslims of Afghanistan fought back. For them, this was a defensive armed struggle against infidel invaders, and a jihad or holy war was declared.
When the Soviets invaded Afghanistan, suddenly there was a chance to get Islam on our side, on the side of the West. And the Americans very cleverly, I think, seized the opportunity by supporting them.
The West, who opposed communism on political grounds, and the Muslims who opposed communism on religious grounds, could now be united in fighting the supreme enemy, the Soviet Union. And President Carter's national security advisor seized the opportunity.
Literally, the day after the Soviet action in Kabul, I wrote a memo to the President in which the key sentence was, we now have the opportunity to give the Soviet Union its Vietnam.
Those Afghan guerrillas were going to fight whether they had only the Enfield rifles that the British had left for them from World War I, or whether they had the better munitions that we could provide them. And so I found that I could, in conscience, support this, and went to the president and said, let's start this supply of arms to the Afghan insurgents. And we started it very soon after the Soviet invasion took place at the end of 1979.
The first aim was to give the Russians as bloody a nose as possible, especially after the massive aid they'd given to the North Vietnamese and all those American casualties in Vietnam. So this was, if you will, a payback.
In this Cold War environment, a covert policy was developed. Billions of dollars were provided by America and its Middle Eastern allies, particularly Saudi Arabia, whilst Pakistan's secret intelligence services coordinated the fighting. As this was a clandestine operation at the time, the Afghan Mujahideen were initially supplied with only Soviet-made weapons.
We supplied weapons which could logically only have been, or ostensibly have been found on the battlefield. The ancient 303 Enfields and various Soviet-made weapons such as the rocket launchers, the RPG-7s, the Kalashnikovs, the Soviet-made heavy machine guns. On the 10th of January, the first weapons that we sent got in there. So that was very quick, 13 days, in come the arms.
This was the first time in the history of Islam that you had a jihad which was sanctioned by forces outside the Islamic world. In the modern times, it is this dominant Western culture decided that what was taking place in Afghanistan was a jihad. It was legitimate to do it. It was nothing illegal to go and fight in. It was also happening in front of television cameras. So it was sending powerful messages to people. It was redefining the very concept of jihad, because now jihad became fighting in the battlefield.
Thousands of Mujahideen from a range of different backgrounds flocked to the city of Peshawar in Pakistan in order to cross the border to join the anti-Soviet jihad in Afghanistan.
Even to this day, it unites Muslim peoples like nothing has united them in the last 100 years. Communism is an atheistic regime, so of course as Muslims we must oppose it. That being the case, yes, it rejuvenated and it actually made Muslims aware of what they were and who they are, and that the fact that they could oppose evil from non-Muslim regimes, whether it was from the East or from the West.
One of the first Mujahideen fighters to arrive in Afghanistan was the 22-year-old son of a Saudi Arabian billionaire. He was called Osama bin Laden. He became one of the wealthiest private financiers of the Afghan jihad. His family built their wealth through land development, and he used these skills to construct roads and tunnels and hospitals for the wounded. He also acquired, for some, an almost mythic status.
He was a Muslim helping other Muslims. He was a multi-millionaire from one of the richest families in Saudi Arabia. He didn't have to go, but he went and sacrificed himself and his wealth for the benefit of others in Afghanistan.
Dana Rohrabacher, one of Ronald Reagan's speechwriters during his presidency, went out to Afghanistan to meet the Mujahideen at this time.
Bin Laden personally showed some courage during the Afghan war. He was, after all, he was there. There were some mortars and airplane attacks and helicopter gunships and landmines, all of which could have easily taken his life. And he had the courage to go. And now, I don't know whether the stories of bin Laden in battle are true or not. They may not be true, that he actually ran into Soviet camps and killed people with his own hands. Now, I don't know if that's true or not, but he was at least there.
The appeal of Osama bin Laden lies in his image, or how the Muslim world perceives him. Very